All right, hi everyone, welcome back. I'm here with our panelists. We have a great panel lined up. Obviously, this first session, we wanted to cover financial planning and all that goes along with it, a little bit on rate setting and affordability. So we wanted to have a panel discussion on today's session that covered affordability. I think at this conference, ever since we launched the Water Finance Conference in 2015, we've had a panel discussion that covered affordability in some fashion. It's obviously a huge topic of discussion when we talk about water utility financing. So I'm really happy to be presenting another great affordability panel this year. I'd like to go ahead and introduce our panelists, and I'll be coming to them in this order. First off, we have Maria Coe, Manager of Rates and Financial Planning with Seattle Public Utilities. We have Erin Boeke-Burke, Associate Director of Sustainable Finance at S&P Global Ratings. Joe Crea, Senior Manager at Raftelis, our session sponsor for today. And we have Greg Baird, President of the Water Finance Research Foundation. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's great to have you with us. I would first like to go to each of you to introduce yourselves and to give some brief remarks on your current role and a little bit of your work and current responsibilities as it relates to finance and specifically affordability. Maria, I'll go to you first.
Great. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having us. So Maria Coe, Seattle Public Utilities. I've been there about 12 years and manage the rates and financial planning section. So we're responsible for all the rate setting for the utilities' many lines of business. This includes solid waste, sewer, stormwater, and both retail and wholesale water. My team also provides a lot of financial analysis for various efforts around the utility, including our utility discount program and other affordability incentives we've been working on. Recently, we worked with Joe and his team, including Manny Teodoro at Texas A&M, to really delve into some metrics and try to work on looking at different ways we could look at what the EPA is doing with affordability, especially in relationship to a consent decree. My team also, we will do all the bond financing for the for various capital programs, and most recently closed a $192 million WIFIA loan at 1.01% interest rate. So very excited about that. Thank you.
All right, Erin.
Sure, thanks, and great to be back at the Water Finance Conference. I have met many of you in the past in my position as a ratings analyst for U.S. public finance on municipal and public utilities, mostly water and sewer sector, also some power sector. I have recently switched roles. Now I'm on the sustainable finance team, where instead I look at environmental, social, and governance considerations in investing. Obviously, affordability being a major social consideration. So a topic that's always been dear to my heart is something that I still get to focus on extensively. Before S&P, I was at Federal OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, for about 6.5 years, where I worked on the Army Corps of Engineers budget, as well as federal lending programs, including early drafts of the WIFIA program.
All right, Joe.
Great. Good afternoon, everybody. Joe Crea, and I've been working in the water industry for just about 13 years, and our company, Raftelis, we work with municipal clients across the country on all sorts of financial management and rate setting engagements. And I've really been fortunate to work with, as Maria mentioned, the city of Seattle recently, and a number of other municipalities across the country in sort of evaluating and trying to understand what the real household affordability challenges are on a local basis, and how do you apply that information to kind of inform your financial planning, your rate setting, and your capital financing plan. So look forward to sharing that information, what I've learned with y'all today. Also just mention I'm on the AWWA's the Affordability Subcommittee of the Rates and Charges Committee, and there's a few things that may come up in the conversation that I can share about what we're working on lately there too. So I look forward to the conversation.
Great, thanks, Joe. Greg?
Yes, happy to be here. Thank you very much, Andrew, and good to meet everybody else. Affordability, it's been something that I've dealt with a lot in my career. First, as a finance officer over in California, not only dealing with the general fund for a full service city, but focusing in on water and sewer under Proposition 218 issues and taxpayer revolts and everything else that it goes along with that. Then, as a chief financial officer for Colorado's third largest municipal utility, we also dealt with a lot of the different affordability issues, because what I started noticing was every utility, every city is a little bit different on how they define affordability. And during the Great Recession, we saw, just as we're seeing under COVID-19, a lot of different revenue impacts and how the city, what happens at the city, it starts flowing, back to the utilities also. And then as a consultant working with engineering firms, looking at consent decree affordability with the EPA, it was very interesting, once again, Baltimore and other places, how you could bring to them some very good stats at looking at affordability issues down to the census tract level. But every utility, once again, really had to define what affordability meant to them. And even though we have the metrics with the EPA saying that, water and wastewater affordability is between 4 and 4.5% of the median household income, that metric really doesn't measure affordability for the city. It was a metric for consent decrees for the community, not necessarily individual households. And I think that's created a lot of different problems with understanding what affordability is to people.
Sure, absolutely, Greg. And that's definitely a good introduction to set the stage on the topic as well. Like I said, I think affordability, this is something that we've covered every year at the conference. And I think we always ask this question, which is going to be my first question to you guys, a simple question to start us off. And a couple of different parts to it. First off, is water a right? And as a second part to that, how is water and sewer affordability kind of currently defined? Whether in our industry or by the public, and is that how it should be defined? So I'd like you guys to address that. So Maria, I'll go to you first.
All right, thank you. I think water should be considered a right. I don't know that consistently across the country that the way we think about it and our laws are established for rate setting, that we really consider it a right. I think it's becoming more of a topic of conversation, and we're collectively starting to change some of our thinking. That said, I think we have a little ways to go until we can really create some rate structures that make it more of a right and change our thinking of that. I think that also brings up not who should be paying for water, but how we're going to be paying for it. And affordability as a term itself, I think is in flux. Greg went and brought up the EPA standard or EPA measurement, which is I think what a lot of people default to. I think when we talk about if our rates affordable, they also will default to our rates increasing at or above inflation, which isn't necessarily an accurate target or way of thinking about affordability, and especially in context to how your rates are increasing and what's driving those.
All right. Erin, same question. How do you, is water a right? And is that even the right question? And talk a little bit about how affordability is defined or should be defined.
Well, I think water definitely is a right. The right to drinking water, to sanitation is established in international human rights covenants, as well as national constitutions around the world. And that's why we see instances of things like the UN calling water shutoffs a human rights violation. That said, when it comes to having a standard on affordability, we don't really have one yet when it comes to figuring out how we charge for water or how we pay for water infrastructure. It's largely been left up to local communities to figure that out. And I feel like that actually is the right approach for the time being, letting communities figure it out independently, because affordability challenges really vary depending on your customer base, depending on your asset needs. We can tell when people are unable to pay their bill because they stop paying their bill. But at the same time, I think utilities need to have that flexibility to define for them what affordability means for their community, so that they can take the actions that they need to make sure that everyone has access to clean drinking water, to sanitation, but that they can do so in a way that doesn't sacrifice the utility's finances, its operations, and its ability to make the investments that it needs.
All right, Joe, you want to address this one?
Yeah, I'd love to maybe just add on a little bit. I think, there's been a lot of great points made by both Maria and Erin, and, there's a couple of different aspects of this question. The first one, is water, right? I think that one is important to really unpack. There's, I think, two different aspects of that. There's the, the basic human health requirements of water that we all need to get by on a daily basis for drinking, cooking, cleaning, sanitation. And then there's sort of all the other ways that we use water to wash our cars, to irrigate our lawns, that businesses use it for processes. And there's, so I think, we have to be careful to identify that there is a basic human need for water. And there's some movement right now to kind of develop allocations as part of a formal rate setting process where human health is a functional requirement of a utility, which kind of ties it back to, AWWA's, their strategic vision is to, the core principle, the first core principle is to protect human health. And, clean water is really the primary way that we can do that. And so with including that as a function in your sort of rate making, the cost of service approach really allows utilities sort of the ability to target affordability from a rate making perspective and maybe address affordability through their rate structure. And the other thing is, as Greg alluded to, with sort of defining affordability, right now, that the EPA's guidance, 4% of MHI, 4.5%, depending on how you kind of interpret various documents, is really being taken out of context. It's not the appropriate measure for household affordability, which is, Erin clearly said, it's a very local thing. It's a very personal thing. I think even within, the same municipality, I value water because we work in that industry every day, and I know the tremendous benefit that we all get from it. But someone that is in the banking sector, for example, may have a different, even though we're in the same community. So it's a very challenging thing to address and to quantify, and that's why it is important to have some flexibility and a number of different ways to look at that. And I think we're really just starting to unpack that as an industry and trying to tackle and understand all the different kind of almost competing issues at play.
Yeah, Greg, and I'll go to you next. Any thoughts on again how we define water as a right and how we define affordability?
Well, it's interesting because a lot of times before I would hear water is a right, as a CFO, people would say water's free. It falls down, from the sky. It should be free, and then they would say, we have a right to that water. And over in Colorado, it was interesting because, water has its own court system, and water is very valuable in arid states, to the point where in Colorado, the city of Aurora, we legalized the water where I could tell someone, see that cloud above us? If it rains, I own that water. If you retain it for more than 24 hours, I can charge you for what was evaporated, because that water would have been owned by the city. And so we were, water utilities are monopolies, and we have a service that we provide. It may be free when it falls to the ground, but then having people understand that you're delivering it 24/7, you're treating it. You don't have to worry about, turning on your tap and whether or not water is going to be there or it's going to have a good high quality. And that's some of what that quality of service and that quality of water, that's really where the price is. So we can say water is a right, yes, so you can go to some place where maybe there's more of a right there and it's cheaper. But if you go in the middle of the desert and you say, I deserve to have X amount of water, scarcity falls into play. You choosing where you're going to live and what you're going to do and how you're going to use that water, all of those different elements come into play as to the quality of the service and whatnot. So is water a right? You need it for life, but it still comes at a cost.
Absolutely, and I think that's one of the things about affordability is when we talk about that, it's you're not necessarily paying for the water, you're paying for the cost of service, and one of the things that always is interesting to me when we have these types of discussions is kind of that I think the dynamic comes out of we work in the water industry. So we deal with these issues every day. We hear about this stuff. So I think we kind of have a different perspective on this than the average person who doesn't necessarily think about what it takes to maintain water infrastructure and that there's a cost to all of that. It's certainly an interesting dynamic. So coming to my next question, I want to talk a little bit about customer affordability programs because that's really geared towards the big issue when we talk about affordability is low income customers and how do we help them out? There's been a lot of examples of customer affordability programs aimed at addressing that issue in the water and sewer utility industry in recent years. I'd like to know your guys' thoughts on the effectiveness of some of these programs that you've seen. So Maria, starting with you again, maybe you could tell us a little bit about some of the affordability work that you guys have done in Seattle and, the effectiveness as you see it.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I think the efficacy is definitely the big issue. I think there's a lot of intent across the country to assist. But, we've discovered at Seattle Public Utilities, you have to go to where your customers are that need that assistance. So that's understanding, as Erin and Joe both brought up, it's a local issue. You need to understand your local population and go to where they are. And it's not just a language barrier you need to worry about, it's finding different ways to reach out to them. We have a utility discount program where customers are eligible for 50% discount on their customer bills. We also have been expanding that to do an auto enroll pilot program that's been successful. So we've also been looking at different ways. It's not just through the bill, but is there ways we can prevent them from getting to shutoffs? We've been looking at a shutoff pilot, also a leak adjustment program. So trying to get them in different places that affordability and that the bills are hitting them. So is there different, also the other things that are affecting such as side sewer issues, that's a largely untapped area. Side sewers can be horrifically expensive, especially for low income. As far as shutoffs, back to those again, we're, have a goal of trying to, if you're in the utility discount program, ultimately we'd like to prevent people from getting to the shutoff status through assistance. Legislation is up today for creating a donation program. Our sister utility, Seattle City Light, has a donation program. Seattle Public Utilities is working on getting one established as well. So it would be in addition to the utility discount program. And then we have an emergency assistance program as well. And people would also be able to apply for donations to help with their bills too. As I mentioned earlier, worked with Joe and his team to work on creating some metrics to really evaluate kind of what is a reasonable threshold for affordability outside of the EPA's median target. And looking at that, it's able to help you kind of get a better idea. It doesn't provide a solution or an answer per se, but it gives you different ways to look at how your bill is impacting different parts of your population.
Yeah, absolutely. Erin, I'll come to you on this one for some thoughts on customer affordability programs, and from your perspective, what have you seen as in terms of the effectiveness of some of these programs across the country? Are they working? Are they not working? What are your thoughts on that?
Sure. I think first of all, it's important to point out that the options for customer availability programs or customer assistance programs can really depend on state law. So not only do we see a lot of different approaches due to legal constraints, we also see a lot of different approaches due to the local needs. And there are definitely some instances, Great Lakes Water Authority would be an example, where we've seen an incredible reduction in the number of shutoffs. And that has different benefits from a financial standpoint. It makes your revenues more reliable. It can help shore up public support for the utilities so that then if you need an increase in revenues, you can get a rate increase through in the future. And we don't just have to worry about affordability in terms of paying for the cost now. We have to also be looking at long-term costs because, especially with climate change, resources are going to be changing. Additional sources of water or new water supply is often more expensive than what we've been using to date. Also dealing with the issues of aging infrastructure and being able to work through those consent decrees. It's not just the cost now, it's the cost 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and those adaptation costs. But even though you see these examples that seem to be working incredibly well, that's not necessarily the case. I can recall one phone call I had with an issuer, and they said, well, we actually were looking at the data and we had this program in place, and we realized the beneficiaries overwhelmingly were people who had vacation homes in the service area, because they had incredibly low consumption. And so we had a really low bar for, our minimum use rate. Most of those benefits were going to these vacation homes as opposed to people in the community who were really struggling. So I think it's really important, like Maria said, to be doing that analysis, to be looking at how the impacts of your rate structure, of your benefit programs are actually affecting communities. In the current environment with COVID, obviously we've seen voluntary or mandatory ceases and shutoffs or reconnect programs throughout the country. Even beyond the legally required ones, we've also seen more utilities saying, okay, clearly there's an issue here. We've got people with water debt. We need to come up with some kind of a solution to help them catch up on their bills, because all of these people who've been unemployed for several months, they've fallen a few months behind. It wasn't an issue before, but now we need to figure out some way to help them catch up. So we're seeing some more creativity there. And I think it's going to be a matter of looking at how those programs are implemented. Obviously, the more complicated your program is, the more difficult it is to implement. So those are all different challenges, but definitely in terms of understanding who's in need, a well-run affordability program can be a financial boon as well as just good for the community, because it can help make your revenues more reliable. It can help you be able to get those rate increases that you need in the future so that your system works for all of your customers and all of your constituents.
Yeah, those are some great points. And Joe, I'll come to you next for your thoughts on this. Obviously, you guys work on affordability programs with a lot of your clients. And as Erin and Maria both alluded to, so, a lot of these can be very effective. Other times there might be some challenges with making sure that they are targeted to the customers that need them most. What are your thoughts on the effectiveness of these programs?
Yeah, we do a lot of work in trying to measure that. And generally, most programs, I think if you're going to kind of just think about it, the numbers, they're not effective at reaching the people that need to be helped. So when we try to evaluate, programs, we'll look at what are the current enrollment levels, compare that to, for your service area, what does your income distribution look like? How many folks do you have who are low income, who are at certain levels of the poverty rate, certain age demographics, to try to identify what is the eligible, percent of people in your service area that might need help. And generally, when you do that, you're reaching, it kind of depends. A successful program is reaching 15 to 30%, and sorry, I say successful. Some of the programs with the highest levels of enrollment across the industry are about 15 to 30% of the eligible population is typically, participating in these programs. So again, 30% on the high end, I don't know that anyone would consider that an effective program. And there's lots of challenges, though. It's not necessarily the utility's fault, or for lack of trying. There's a number of hurdles. The first is, and I think the biggest one, is that a lot of the folks who need assistance, low-income folks, they live in multifamily housing, they live in apartments. They may not be direct customers of a utility. They don't have a sub-metered connection to the water department. And so it's very hard to actually provide them with the benefit that they might need, because if you give their account a benefit, it might go to a landlord who doesn't, need that. And so it's, trying to get through that non-direct customer issue is definitely a challenge. And Maria might be able to share a little bit. Seattle has an innovative way to kind of address that, which I think, I think is a great approach with partnering with their energy company to sort of provide that. The other thing I think, want to mention, and I'm losing my train of thought, is I think as Erin was saying, you can get very comprehensive, and really, a well-developed affordability program needs lots of different elements. It needs a discount rate, it needs crisis assistance vouchers, plumbing assistance. Maybe you partner with the social service agency so that if someone gets a payment plan with you, they also can get into sort of a counseling to learn about budgeting and managing a household budget. So there's lots and lots of aspects that are sort of in a perfect customer affordability program, but all of that takes a lot of time, a lot of energy, and a lot of money from utilities to be able to kind of administer that. Most utilities don't have the luxury of all that time and money to be able to do those programs. Philadelphia has implemented their tiered assistance program, which is a very highly specialized program that looks at individual customers' affordability based on their household incomes to basically cap what they would pay for service. And that's effective, but again, it's very administratively burdensome. And so, that's certainly a challenging program to roll out everywhere. And then if you think about, other ways to address the non-direct customers, we're working with another client, and they're exploring directly paying non-customers of the utility just to sort of subsidize the costs that water as part of their rent. But then you get into, then the city's going to start issuing 1040s for every kind of renter in the city that they're sending these checks to manage that. And is that a legal thing? Can they do that? So there's lots and lots of challenges to kind of think through when you try to kind of move beyond in those programs to try to get a more effective program in place. It's a very difficult challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. And Greg, I'll come to you next for thoughts on customer affordability programs and how you feel they've been able to benefit the industry or the challenges involved.
Yeah, every locality, we've said this, has to define affordability and understand their demographics. Here, we know that in 2018, as an example, in the United States, 14% of the population was at the poverty level. If you compare Detroit to that, they were at 35%. And it's different, wherever you go. But some of the real successful or robust programs that we've seen out there for these caps would be like San Antonio Water System, SAWS. Their Uplift program has 14 different types of assistance program. Low income, you have senior citizens, people experiencing domestic violence, people with disabilities, crisis, temporary crisis, renters in multifamily buildings. So they have a really good understanding of their demographics and when people might run into a problem, even if they had good, steady income for a very long time, but they're in a crisis. And so there's something that will be able to address that for everybody. One of the other things is a lot of times we think of on the cap side, but when you think of maybe low income, they're in housing that may have been built in the early 1900s. Their energy bill might actually be higher just because it has poor insulation. Their toilets could be flushing a lot of water and using more water. The Alliance for Water Efficiency in June of 2020, they published a study, The Assessment of Water Affordability and Conservation Potential for Detroit, Michigan, and they found that if just the toilet replacement program by itself would have actually been able to reduce water bills for low-income people by about 13% or $10 a month. And if the combined water wastewater bill was around, say $70, $80, then $10 is a lot of money. So there's a lot of other things and programs that could actually benefit low income with affordability issues.
Definitely. And, I'm just as you guys are talking, I'm starting to see that we're getting some questions coming in from our audience. Let's try and go through one more question, and then I'll try and I'll give you guys some questions we're getting from the audience. Another thing that I thought it might be important to cover, as long as we're kind of starting at the broad overview of affordability. Let's talk a little bit about utility governance models and how they relate to infrastructure and water, the adequacy of water quality. Can you guys speak to how governance relates to rate approvals and affordability programs? Maria? Sure.
I think the established process of going through it helps to create stability in rates to an extent. That said, process and government together can be a bit of an enemy of efficiency and innovation sometimes. A lot of our rate structure and financing is basically prescribed pretty much through Washington state law and also case law. There's been, as Greg mentioned, water courts in Colorado. There's been plenty of lawsuits and legal cases in Washington as well that provide a lot of guidelines on how we structure rates. That said, as we've all talked about, being able to establish rates and having a process at the local level. So having those governing bodies at the local level and not going through a large state process, I think adds a lot more flexibility and ability to react more for local agencies to address issues, either for infrastructure or also rates as far as affordability goes.
Yeah, of course. That always, we always talk about how a utility is managed and its policies and how it can set rates. It really is many times dependent on the local government and I guess the policies of the elected officials. Erin, what are your thoughts on this governance as it relates to quality of water, setting rates, affordability? What are your thoughts on this?
I think this is just one of those cases, one of many cases where the strength of management is absolutely essential. And, you see these utilities that are really well run, that have integrated risk management, that have integrated asset management. Essentially, in order to have a well-run utility, you need to have a good understanding of your capital needs, of your water quality issues, of your quantity issues, of your treatment needs. And from that, develop a long-term capital plan to meet all those needs. Look at all of the options in terms of operating costs, capital costs, timing issues. That tells you how much revenue you're going to need. If you really understand and have a comprehensive grasp on how much revenue you're going to need now and, a few years down the line, then you can really develop rate structures and customer assistance to help you get there in a way that's going to be stable, that's going to be predictable, that you can explain to your customers as well as to regulators or other public officials who might have a lot of questions. For those utilities that are rate regulated, having a strong relationship and a trusting relationship with your regulator is something that we definitely look for in terms of knowing that when you need an adjustment to your rates, knowing that when you develop some kind of a program for customer assistance or to address any other kinds of affordability concerns, that you've got a relationship there where you're going to be able to get what you expect. And, there's definitely utilities that we talk to where they say, well, we overestimate this and we ask for a 20% increase because hopefully that way we'll get 10. That's a really challenging environment to be developing your rate plans as well as your capital plans in. So I think having those trusting relationships with regulators, having a comprehensive look that is across the organization, that's not stovepiped, whether you think of it as effective utility management or the triple bottom line or enterprise risk management, something where as that information comes in, it's being understood throughout the organization and it touches everything from capital planning to what you're going to do about your rates. Having that forward look is really, really a sign of strong management. And what we've seen is, especially in this latest pandemic, utilities with stronger management have also been able to better manage their finances, but also have been on the ball, let's say, in terms of managing the affordability pressures as well.
Yeah, and Joe, come to you next on your thoughts on this governance as it relates to rate setting and affordability.
Just a couple of quick additions. I think Maria and Erin have done a great job of kind of illustrating it. Important to, I think, keep in mind is that across the country, we've got something like 50,000 water utilities, the vast majority of which provide service to sort of under 3,500 connections. So, and that certainly plays into your ability, scale certainly plays into the ability of utility to kind of do all the right things that Erin was describing. And so there's some different challenges depending on kind of the utility, the size, that I think the industry as a whole is still trying to figure out how do we get that more manageable. And I think also, trust is such a big issue, as Maria was talking about, having those decisions made at a local level, generally, you can get more trust and more buy-in from your stakeholders when they know that it's the local folks who've made the decisions to kind of make certain improvements to the system and to implement programs, and it's not something coming from the state or federal government. But trust, I think it really comes down to trust, to be able to make that forward-looking plan, to really be able to get buy-in and support from your customers so that you can create that comprehensive vision. And unfortunately, that is challenging for some utilities, just given the political nature that some governance models are subject to, where they're just sort of part of a big political machinery that's been in place for decades and is hard to kind of separate itself and really function like a business, like the water utility should.
Okay, Greg, your thoughts on governance models as it relates to rate approvals and affordability?
Yeah, so if we, I really like some comments that Erin and Joe made. If we remember that 85% of all of the utilities in the U.S., water utilities in the U.S., they're owned or controlled by some form of municipal government. So that's the mayor and elected city council. And Erin was spot on when she said, credit agencies, and they've done a lot of negative outlook for municipalities. On the utility side that have their own credits, and the 2,500 utilities that have access to the bond market, they're being visited and they're being looked at from a perspective of what's their governance model and do they support their bond covenants, which basically say you're going to fund and maintain your assets appropriately. And if you said you're going to increase the rates, do you still have that intent and can you follow through with that? So with the different governance models, we have always seen where, someone will run a political agenda on no new water rate increases, or I'm going to cut waste out of government, and that's their byline. And it's really interesting working with mayors and city councils to then bring in the asset management information and help them understand, well, if we don't do this work and the number of water main breaks increase, a water main break is going to cost 2 to 4 times more as an emergency repair, as an unplanned maintenance item versus pre-planning. And as we continue to degrade and reduce our service levels, then we're increasing our risk if climate change, flooding, or some sort of disaster hits. It's how low we are, and then what's it going to take to be able to get that resilience. Whereas if we had a well-run system, we take a hit, we're going to be able to bounce back a lot faster. And so there's all these different facets of affordability. And so when we think of governance model with 4-year elected cycles, where they don't necessarily want to, give too much on the rate increases, water utilities is something that we have to take a long-term vision on, and we have to think long-term affordability. I have to admit that as a CFO, when people would talk about privatization, I'm thinking, nah, we don't need to do that. But I've seen too many places where elected officials, the governance model just would not let staff ask for the rate increases that they needed, and the system degraded to a point that it just costs so much more. And so the affordability in the future was completely out the window because of how it was run for this, 17 years or 15 years. So governance is a very important component, and taking that long-term look on affordability, then we'll choose the right investments. We'll start looking at investing in digital strategies. We'll start looking at life cycle cost management, comparative analysis, and other aspects of an asset management program that's actually going to reduce our long-term costs. And now we're really talking about sustainable budgeting. We're talking about long-term affordability. And that's the type of discussions that all governance models over water and sewer need to have.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's another good way to tee up this next question. I'm going to go to an audience question here because we're starting to get some in, and this kind of goes back to a little bit at the beginning when we were talking about water rights and I guess affordability in the context of when we're talking about low-income customers. And to Greg's point just now, a lot of the ways that utilities handle affordability, I think, is kind of at the mercy of the local government and the policies of the elected officials. So, none of us here are necessarily policymakers or, anything like that. But just kind of your thoughts here, this audience question came in. Would the panel members advocate a minimal water allocation for individuals per household, and that a utility absorb the cost of non-payment or default due to non-payment for water? So in other words, not shutting off water to any customers. Is that something that you would advocate for? Maybe, Maria, maybe you could address that, I guess, in the context of Seattle or?
I think that can get a little bit, tricky.
Yeah.
We have, so one of, the kind of the hammers you have is being able to shut off at the end of the day. And for our utility, we have water is it's the last line of defense we have over payment of sewer and solid waste bills, as well as that shut off mechanism. In some places it's also tied into your bond covenants as well, and your or even how the bond rating agencies look at you. Maybe Erin can speak a little bit about that. But I know during our rating presentations, that's one of our slides and stuff is we discuss kind of the mechanisms of how we go through and do collections as well. So I don't know that, if you do it, I think you have to be very careful with how you structure it also, because as other people have mentioned, we aren't just serving retail customers. Or, retail isn't just residential. We also have customers that are using water for other purposes than just your sanitation and basic health as well.
Absolutely. And Maria, maybe I'll ask you a follow-up to that, just because I think we'll probably get into some of this stuff a little bit later. Talking in the context of current events and the COVID-19 pandemic. Just could you give us an overview on how Seattle Public Utilities has handled this? There was obviously a lot of talk at the beginning of this about how various utilities, water utilities across the country were going to handle this. You heard about holds being placed on shutoffs, and whether or not there should be some, Congress should enact some laws on that. And then I think utilities, started to kind of handle that on a case-by-case basis. How is Seattle? What have you guys done during this period?
Yeah, so, we have a moratorium on shutoffs right now. We also really been trying to work with customers as far as doing residential and our commercial accounts. We've been offering payment plans, working with them. So we've also taken off the penalties. So we used to have late fees and interest. If you enter into a payment plan, those are waived as well. We've been doing payment arrangements for also leaks, back billing, and unusually high consumption as well. I mentioned earlier for our utility discount program, we had a auto enroll pilot program. We've expanded that as well. So we're trying to get as many people enrolled into the UDP program as easily as possible. We're continuing to communicate with our customers as well. Not only on late fee management, but just all their options they have for trying to work with them so we can prevent shutoffs and also prevent people from getting behind on their bills. A couple months is one thing, but that can quickly spiral as well. The donation program is also another thing that's come up that really was pushed into with COVID, is getting that donation program going as well. And also finally we have an emergency assistance program that was you could qualify for based on if you hit 70% of state median income. That's been increased to 80% recently.
Okay, very good. Erin, I will come to you next on that first question that I asked Maria. Do you have any thoughts on that, about whether or not we should look at a sort of a minimal water allocation for all individuals, and that the utility absorb the cost of non-payment? Is that something that you've heard brought up, or do you have any thoughts on that kind of notion?
Sure. Well, first of all, I just want to say a lot of what Maria just said that they're doing in Seattle is kind of the best practice that we're seeing at a lot of utilities kind of throughout the country. Listen to Maria. She's got so many great ideas. They're doing a lot of things here that are really going to be valuable in terms of meeting customer needs now, as well as keeping the utility on track financially. As far as kind of giving everyone a universal allocation and leaving it up to the utility to absorb the cost, it is not S&P's job to advocate, so I'm going to punt a little bit. But I would point out that some of the really important considerations are one of the reasons that water and sewer is such a highly rated sector. And the median rating amongst the utilities that we rate is an A+, AA-. It's a very highly rated sector. The essentiality of service and the ability and the strength of shutoffs as a collection mechanism is part of that consideration. It's one of the reasons that the finances tend to be so strong, that these utilities tend to be so financially reliable. And we talk about affordability and we focus on people who don't pay because they're not able to. We always have to be aware of the fact that if there is not that collection hammer, some people are going to not pay because they don't want to. And it's always really difficult to differentiate between people who aren't paying because they don't have the capacity and those whose priorities lie elsewhere. But obviously, the more people you have not paying, the more difficult that is. And that's something that your ratings analyst is definitely going to be watching for. We have seen non-payment rates rising in the last, few months. A lot of utilities went from, de minimis amounts, 2%, something like that, of payments in arrears to over 5%. When I I saw some that were approaching 10%. That's a major affordability challenge right now, and that's a major financial challenge for utilities. And so I am definitely not going to advocate for getting rid of shutoffs across the board. Some utilities have used, removing shutoffs strategically for themselves in order to meet their customer base needs. And if you have the financial capacity to be able to absorb that, then that could be a good choice for that individual utility. But for some utilities where, you have the poverty rate of 35%, you have really low income levels, the question assumes that other customers are going to be able to make up the slack for the folks who aren't paying. And in some communities, you don't have people with sufficient financial capacity to pay for their water bill as well as everybody else's. So I think it needs to be strategically thought through. It's going to be on a community by community basis. And you need to be paying attention to the financial health of the utility, because as Greg mentioned, if you start neglecting your maintenance, if you start falling behind on your investments, it's going to cost more down the line. And that's not going to benefit anyone.
Yeah, Erin, those are some great thoughts. I mean, as you mentioned, in order for a utility to even accomplish that, they would have to have the financial means to eat that cost of not shutting off the water. Joe, do you have any thoughts on this? Is this something that your clients, have you ever heard this, does this come up at all? This notion of just eliminating all shutoffs, or, sort of a minimum allocation to customers?
Yeah, we've certainly seen it related to the pandemic, as they've mentioned. And I think you might have got the wrong panel if we're looking for someone to say shut off should be forever eliminated. But as again, with financial planning as sort of my foundation, having that backstop is a strength, as Erin mentioned. But I think it's very important that if you see signs, warning signs, have programs in place where you can proactively kind of help your customers. The things that Seattle's doing that Maria mentioned are sort of a great illustration of ways that you can try to, cut that off before it reaches the shut-off point. And that's ultimately a better place than shutting people off. In terms of the minimum allocation, I think, as I mentioned before, this concept of human health as a component of rate making is a very intriguing item that's sort of being rolled through the kind of redeveloping the M1 manual right now. And that's sort of the biggest thing that we're going to, explore to add to that. And it's not to say that would give everyone, access to a certain amount of water for free. It's just you can identify the cost of meeting that baseline level of need and price that basic service into your rate structure without the need for customer assistance programs that might be harder to administer, harder to get people enrolled in. So if you have that as part of your rate structure, you're not just treating the symptoms, you're sort of, to steal a metaphor from Manny Teodoro, you're inoculating the whole population by building it into your rate structure. And that's a more effective way to reach a larger group and then all the people in your service area that may need help. And if we're able to kind of build that concept into the M1 manual, it may also sort of provide a lot of the legal basis to help places like California, where right now you can't, subsidize one class of service with another because, it's prohibited by state law. But if it's built into sort of the guiding document for how rates are established, that may start to lay the groundwork to be able to expand affordability into rate structures and to really kind of effectively reach customers that need that help.
Okay, and Greg, I'll come to you next for some thoughts on this. I guess the question of completely eliminating shutoffs. Any thoughts on that sort of notion?
Well, as the CFO, I actually had the calls where the school principal calls up and says, "What are you guys doing?" And I'm like, "Well, what do you mean?" They're like, "Little Johnny stinks. It's been he hasn't had a bath for a week. And the reason why is the city cut off his water at his house, and basically you've made his house uninhabitable. What are you going to do about it? And also, as another story as a CFO, I was doing 500 cutoffs a month, and we're coming out of a drought. We have to build some new infrastructure to address that. We're in the middle of a recession, and so there's very limited options. But what I started doing was, if we're going to end up with more cutoffs, and I needed more space, I needed more staff, and then look and evaluate whether or not what we're charging for the cutoffs to be able to pay for a portion of these internal costs that we already had. I basically pushed back on staff, and I said, tell me more about the 500 cutoffs. And you start finding that when people have cash paying jobs, or it's on a weekly basis, and that's how they're trying to accumulate their revenue or their income necessary to be able to pay their bills, sometimes it's a timing issue. And then when I started actually looking at some of these different cutoffs, we're actually paying a little bit more, or sometimes a lot more than someone else, because they're getting slapped with a $40 turn-on fee, every other month. So, and the rest of the customers were kind of subsidizing and paying for the operation of actually shutting off these customers. So when you start taking those dynamics into play, you start realizing that, guess what? We don't have to always do that. For that strict cutoff. And a lot of people, they're willing to pay something. And so I believe that someone should always pay something, and the utility can work with those individuals on a monthly basis, on a quarterly basis, necessary to be able to have them avoid paying more through the cutoff process. But they're buying bottled water. They're going to Starbucks and paying $4 for a coffee, and I'm saying the tap water is the highest quality, cheapest water that anybody is going to have available to them. And so that's where I think it takes some time and some patience to tease out who's willing to pay, and you work with them without unfairly burdening them. For other people who just want to say, I don't like it, I'm not going to pay, I've said, okay, I'm going to shut you off, but guess what? You are more than welcome to drive down to the treatment plant, fill up as much water in buckets or whatever you have, and take it home and stuff. And you can do that as often as you want, and play it that route. One case, it actually lasted 2 weeks before he just said, never mind, I like it being delivered for free, or, for a nominal charge to our house. So you have to case by case look at that, but everyone should pay something because it's not free. But I think we have the flexibility to be able to work with them in their circumstances.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's some more great perspective there, Greg. We are starting to get some more questions coming in from the audience. I don't want to jump around too much, but Erin, I'm going to come to you really quick if you don't mind, because this one seems like it might be in your wheelhouse a little bit, or something that you could address. This question came in here: should utilities start reporting utility payments to credit agencies? In other words, should they start tracking credit scores of customers, which would, I guess, help them in determining which customers aren't paying due to their choice versus their overall financial condition? Is that something that you might be able to address?
Sure, I'm happy to take that one, and I did see it down there. I am going to come back to the fact that our criteria for public water and sewer utilities is agnostic in terms of rate structure. So how you want to get your revenue, how you want to structure your rates, if you want to have a customer assistance program, that's up to you. what the utility or what the ratings agencies or what S&P Global, I can't speak for any others, what S&P Global is looking for is we're looking for signs of affordability pressure that could compromise the performance, both financial and operational and otherwise, of your utility. And affordability pressure, this is for ratings, right? Because ratings are about our bondholders going to be able to get paid. So we need to be focused on that long-term financial sustainability and integrity. So if you want to run a utility that has very high levels of non-payment and you have the financial capacity to do so, that is not going to be viewed differently on the face from a utility that charges everyone the same and gets the same amount of payment from every single customer. We are going to look at if management has a good understanding of that, if it is being done strategically and for different reasons. Different utilities have different needs in terms of their rate setting. I've talked to some that say, you know, we're just going to charge everyone a flat fee. We've done it for 50 years. We've got plenty of water here. We don't need a conservation signal. And our customers like knowing what their bill is going to be every single month. We've got others that say we really need a strong conservation signal. We've got others that say we've got a lot of disparities and a very large low-income population. So we're trying to structure something that will protect the affordability for the low-income customers. And that's how we've structured it. And that's how we're running the utility. The kinds of metrics that S&P, when we're talking to you about your rating, the questions that we're going to have are, you know, how do your rates compare to median household income? Because we're looking for those kind of across the board signs of utility financial stress. Same thing goes for looking at the county poverty rate. We have it. We factor it into our analysis because even if your bill as a percent of median income is the same in a community that has a much higher poverty rate could have a lot more underlying stress that they need to address. And that's a challenge in terms of being able to have stable finances in the future. So that's why we look at those two together. We don't look at, you know, just one. In terms of signs, additional signs of affordability stress, we will ask about non-payment rates, delinquency rates. And like I said, we've seen that going up, and the utilities with strong management teams have said, yes, it's going up, but here's our plan to deal with it, to get those customers paying again, to make sure that they're not cut off. If they are cut off, to get them reconnected. As far as, you know, the credit scores of people who aren't paying, I think looking at that and trying to decide who's not paying because they're unable to versus something else, that's really a matter for utility and management to decide. So that would definitely fall under the ratings agency or the S&P rating agnostic category. So I have never asked for that as a ratings analyst.
Sure. Okay, guys, I am going to continue on with some audience questions here because we're getting some good ones in, and I want to go back to when we were talking about CAPs. So we were talking about the administrative cost of assistance programs. So this question here, how do the costs of shutting off service compare to the administration of the assistance programs designed to prevent the shutoffs? So is it less costly or more costly to the utility to provide assistance as compared to actually pursuing a cutoff? Maria, any thoughts on that?
I mean, so I haven't looked at that dollar to dollar. If you're looking for, strictly a financial breakdown, I think you have to include more of a human factor in that than just a strict financial one. I mean, this kind of goes into water as a right also. So Seattle has median income of nearly $93,000. It's probably higher than that. We have barely any middle class. So you have people that are very wealthy, and then you tend to have ones that are not in that situation. So I think we should be looking to help people with, make their utility bills with utility discount programs, emergency assistance, however we can to help prevent that. So I think that's part of the cost that goes into it. We do have one of the most generous utility discount programs, I think, in the country with offering 50% discount. It is built into our revenue requirement, part of our rate design. And so it is spread across the customer base.
Erin, do you want to tackle anything on that, kind of the cost of administering a program versus the cost of pursuing a shutoff?
I think the other members of the panel are much more experienced and qualified to address that actual question.
Joe, I'll come to you next. Any thoughts on that one?
Well, just, a brief couple things. I think Greg probably has more that he can layer in. I think he already sort of mentioned some of the experience previously, but when we're sort of reviewing them, often we'll find that, a customer assistance program will cost a utility sort of in the 2, 3, 4% of annual revenues range. So to provide a little perspective there, I mean, a pretty well-run program can be a meaningful component of your annual revenue, what you're getting in every year. And not, I don't know, again, as Maria said, haven't necessarily compared costs of shutting people off every year and how that would align. I'd be surprised if it exceeded that number, but again, as I think Greg can describe more, 500 shutoffs in a month, that's a big commitment of staff resources, and that certainly is worth exploring to sort of get to a better solution than just cutting people off, that many people a month.
Okay, Greg, thoughts on this one?
Yeah. Well, so one, we have to remember everybody's dealing with water, and water is a monopoly. Okay, there, unless you're buying bottled water, there's not any other place to go. So, and I hate credit cards. So if someone wants to check someone's credit to say whether or not, you can sign up for water with the city, I think that's a little ridiculous. I think if you're going to play in that area, then you charge everybody some nominal amount for a deposit and start from there. If versus trying to play into that other stuff. When you look at different programs that we have conservation program. Everybody's paying for a conservation program, but how many people are actually doing the toilets or the low flow shower heads or different things like that? It's a very small percentage of people, and we're funding our conservation program, and it could be $1 million, but only maybe 5 to 10% of our entire rate base is actually utilizing it. So I apply that to the same type of thing on these CAPS programs. You could have a very robust one that could help almost anybody in any circumstance, and you realize then that it's you can do it. You go through the rate process, you get that approved. You realize that that could be say 2 to 4%. But you also realize that you probably had arrears or non-payment bad debt write-off between 1 and 2%. And if you can start working with the people and make sure that doesn't increase higher than 2%, then it's not going to show up over in S&P's evaluation. So you get to balance these different things out. We also realize as humans that we need water, and if you start shutting off and turning on household water, you're disturbing the pipes. You're depending on how long it goes, you're building up heavy metals that within the pipes and different issues. So let alone the drinking hydration and the COVID-19 washing your hands and good personal hygiene. So there's a lot of reasons why people should be able to support these CAP programs, and it shouldn't just be a service that everybody doesn't pay into, because there's that public health benefit back to everybody. So I'm okay that the cost could potentially go up, that it's really robust. But I still think, there's no free lunch and there's no free water. So, work with the people to try to figure out what that level is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, actually, one other thing I just want to note is this kind of goes back to that question up front of the complexity of the affordability program or the, shut-off assistance or emergency assistance program that you want to put in place, because we've definitely seen some utilities say that they've got, very easy to administer, simple programs. Obviously, you don't have the same kind of detailed targeting, but a lot of the answer to this question in terms of which costs more is going to depend on the complexity of the program and how administratively intense it is. And I'm reiterate what everybody said in terms of the human costs as well as the dollar amounts.
Yeah, and Erin, the interesting thing is utilities are effectively, they have every legal right to get their money. Without shutoffs, they could still do a lien on the property. And even if the renter bolts, basically from that property owner who would have had the renter's deposit, basically you can apply a lien back to that property. So utilities are going to get their money. It's just a matter of timing, and cash flow as a result. So they're empowered to really be able to get their money. So at the end of the day, I think they can be a little bit more reasonable and work with people, allowing and looking at the cash flow issues that they're dealing with.
Certainly. Yeah, those are some great points, guys. I want to try and get through two more questions if we can. And I wanted to switch gears just a little bit and ask you guys a broader question just related to financial planning in the water sector. And Maria, I'd be curious to get your thoughts on this, being with the utility. And Greg, this is something that we've talked about a lot over the last couple of years. It's been something that's come up at this conference in the last couple of years. What I'm talking about is kind of the synergies between all the new technologies being implemented at water utilities and then the financial planning end of it. So I'm thinking, for example, AMI or upgrades in metering systems that utilities have. A lot of this new technology has an impact on cost savings, on recovering hidden revenues. How is this then factored into the future financial planning? Is some of this considered when you look at rates? Maria, maybe you can address that from your perspective at Seattle. How closely is your role tied to new technologies like that being implemented at utilities?
Yeah, so Seattle has not implemented AMI, but we are looking. We work really closely with the lines of business we have to look at and try to get long-term plans, especially infrastructure, and what our expenses are going to look like. As Erin mentioned previously, also, having that relationship with your governance body, your council, and being able to let them know what's coming up. As far as rate structures, it's tremendously helpful for letting people know. It's a great service to your customers as well. We go through a strategic business plan process where we do a rate projection over a 6-year horizon. And 6 years isn't necessarily a ton of time, and they aren't adopted, but it does give, basically establishes guidelines and what we expect rates to look like over that 6-year period of time. Joe's actually been helping us with our financial planning models. His team's been helping us rebuild those so we can, we're working on doing more longer term, getting out 20, even, I think the dream is closer to those 50 years. So we can really see, one, how it affects affordability. So one of the things that's been built into our financial planning models are these affordability dashboards that we worked with Joe's team on that have a lot of those metrics. And it allows us to look at where our rates are now, and then based on where we see income growing, putting a lot of projections for income and various other sources, and how our rates are growing, how those different metrics change. So, basically you can look at like your capital. If you're having a large capital program coming up, how do you want to structure that to help smooth those rates? And the same thing goes with your capital cash financing as well. There's a lot of mechanisms, kind of levers you have with financial policies for really smoothing your rates, but you've got to know what your expenses are and what that looks like over the long term. So you know what type of cash you need coming in and what those expenses look like. So you can manage not only your debt curve properly, but also your rates as well.
Sure. Yeah, Erin, I know this might be a little bit outside of your area, not being with a utility, but do you have any thoughts on that? Just overall kind of technology impact, perhaps on other ends of a utility and how that affects the financial end?
I mean, I think it all kind of feeds into that question or the topic of good management starts with comprehensive understanding of your assets. And technology can be really helpful in terms of understanding the conditions of your assets, in terms of understanding consumption from the utilities perspective, understanding where you might have an issue, being able to do proactive asset management, which is going to help your understanding of your capital plan, minimize long-term capital costs, and all that's going to feed into affordability. From a customer perspective, it can be empowering in terms of understanding how much you're using, when you're using it, being able to get a handle on that, which can help you reduce your consumption, identify if there's a leak somewhere, because all of a sudden your consumption shoots through the roof. I remember when my brother bought a house and it was just a little 2-bedroom house. And then all of a sudden, 1 month he called me and he goes, my bill's always been $80 and this month it was $350. And I'm like, yeah, you should call your utility, because I'm guessing that, it was an issue with the underwater sprinkling system, which he didn't even know was turned on. Catching issues like that sooner can be really helpful. And those programs that help low-income customers improve their household efficiency. We've talked about the toilets example. There's a lot of other example of dealing with leaks and helping customers with affordability issues control their consumption. AMI can be part of the solution there. There's also other things you can do in terms of that. But I think advanced technology can help both for the customer affordability side of things, as well as utility managing its overall capital needs, which also has long-run affordability issues.
Sure. And Joe, how do you, you obviously have a lot of conversations with clients that perhaps have implemented some of these technologies. I brought up AMI just as an example, but there's several others. But what do you think? Or how much are they kind of considering that end of it when you look at changes to rates and things like that?
Yeah, I think Maria and Erin did a great job of sort of highlighting the importance of how that feeds into the long-term planning aspect, which ultimately saves money. Erin was just describing sort of the ability of the meters to sort of help with leak detection. And one of our clients, they kind of put in AMI and they're getting, I think hourly, maybe even every 15 minutes, they're getting sort of pings off of their system for what the reading is. And they proactively will kind of reach out to customers if they notice an unusual usage pattern. So sort of built into the software is it says, hey, you're using a whole lot of water at 3 a.m, which, maybe you just like to shower then, or you probably have a leak. So there's ways that you can use technology to help affordability from that front. I think we'll see, we're starting to see some, but you'll see a lot more opportunity to sub-meter in multifamily housing. And which I think will provide a lot more ability for utilities to actually provide the benefit, as we talked about it, that's sort of a struggle with customer assistance programs, directly to, renters if they're in a multifamily housing situation. So I think there's a lot of cool opportunities there that will be coming. And I think it's also, from a financial plan, we've got to be careful to also remember there's lots of benefit from this technology, but a lot of it's not cheap. And making sure you factor in the full life cycle cost of these things is important. An AMI system, it's a big upfront cost, a lot of benefit. Often you can kind of get a bump in how much water you're selling because the meters are reading more accurate. But there is a useful life to that. And in 15 or 20 years, those might need to be replaced again at another pretty large kind of capital cost. And so it's important to think about all that stuff. Again, which goes back to the long-term planning that Maria and Erin were describing too. So, there's a lot of opportunity, and I think it's so important that utilities are strategic in what they go after, so that it's effective for them. Because there's so many differences utility to utility.
Greg, thoughts on this one?
Yeah, here with the pandemic and everything that we're dealing with, you could do your financial planning and you can say a status quo model, what is long-term affordability going to look like? And really we need to be integrating infrastructure asset management and ask ourselves, what's the lowest life cycle cost of water delivery at an acceptable service level to our community, define that as affordability, and then say, what can we do to try to do a continuous business process improvement to keep those expenses in check? We've seen a rollout of GIS and the power that that has, a technology that has a direct benefit, and we all understand it. We see AMI, and if you're in a drought area or potential drought, yeah, you need to have AMI, you need to have meters. It should be a no-brainer. But when you think of the other elements of infrastructure asset management, and you look at the different cost drivers, now it's what type of material are you selecting? How are you going to do remote monitoring? Smart pumps? Where is revenue hidden? And do we need to change out valves or meters that might have some inaccuracy, or we need to exercise these valves instead of just replace them after 40 years? And asset management helps us start balancing out what those different short-term, medium-term, and long-term costs are to become more cost-effective. And that's what we owe back to the customers at providing high-quality water on a 24/7 basis, but at a manageable cost, or at least the best we can, given our source, our age of our infrastructure, and the geography. And that's as good as it gets, but it's that integrated approach of infrastructure asset management and financial planning.
Great thoughts on that one, guys. I want to try and just get through one more question that I think would be a good one to end on. And by the way, it's been a pleasure having you guys. I think this has been a great discussion for our attendees on with us this afternoon. I really hope you're enjoying it. When we sort of shifted the format of this conference to the virtual format, it was pretty apparent that we could have covered all of these topics within the context of COVID and kind of the short and long-term impact of this whole pandemic situation it might be having on utility operations and financing. There's so many challenges that utilities deal with on a regular basis. So I didn't want to make that too large a part of the discussion, but I think that's a good place that we can end on. I'd maybe like to get into on this COVID-19 pandemic, what you make of how the industry has responded so far. Maria, perhaps you could speak a little bit more specific to Seattle, but about how the response has gone so far. We've heard about a big challenge being just the simple revenue loss utilities are having, both drinking water and clean water, and what you see as sort of the short and maybe long-term impact of this a year or two from now. What's going to be the impact, on rates and some of the current challenges that we're facing. Maria, start with you.
Yeah, so I think a lot of the kind of the approaches we've taken towards ramping up to address affordability for our customers, I think we're going to see some of those carry forward, such as possibly auto enroll, that pilot that we've expanded. I think some of that will probably carry forward. I think this also gets back to understanding your community and your customer base. We've seen historical shifts in between commercial and residential. Our residential consumption has gone up quite a bit. Commercial has declined quite a bit, with the exception of multifamily. How's that going to play out long run? Even, in the short run over the next year or so. We were anticipating a bit of a recession to come into play before COVID hit, so we had already adjusted our consumption forecast for that a bit. This COVID did exceed those, but and residential increases have not superseded the commercial decreases. But how is that going to come back? There's talk about people continuing to telework. So there will be, I think we're going to see definite continual changes. When does the commercial come back? Luckily, Seattle is not a super heavy industrial area, so we're not anticipating, and we haven't seen, quite frankly, massive declines in commercial consumption. And we're anticipating stuff to rebound relatively well, just based on the commercial use that we have over the next, probably towards the latter half of 2021. I think we also, Seattle's in a good position. We had really strong cash balances for all of our funds going into this. And, we're going to have a leg in cash flow due to the, slower payments. We're going to be able to weather that because we have those strong cash balances. It's not going to create much of an impact for us. So we've been, I think, but going forward, that said, financial policies, we've been reviewing those over the past couple of years. And I think this will definitely take into account, previously it was what's your look for an earthquake? I think we're going to be adding, pandemic is definitely on the list now because it's a different response and different type of cash situation than you'd have for an earthquake. I think, people need to be aware of, have those evaluations in place and use COVID as a good learning point for, what is the cash impact to you? How resilient, how can you make yourself resilient in different ways than just infrastructure?
Absolutely. Erin, thoughts on short and long-term impact?
Yeah, sure. So year to date, the impact on water and sewer utilities as far as their ratings go has still been relatively muted. S&P rates about 1,800 public water and sewer utilities. So far, we've only had 35 rating or outlook changes in the sector, including power utilities, and only 4 of those were rating changes. The rest were outlooks. So I think the impact is still smaller. Like Maria said, a lot of the reasons why are because, water is an essential service. A lot of the utilities that we rate, and mind you, the rated population does tend to be larger with stronger financial capacity. These are the utilities that do use the capital markets as opposed to relying on the local bank or USDA or the SRF for all of their capital funding. So it is a subset. But that essential service, that the fact that even though people might not be going to the office, now they've just kind of transferred their water usage home, and residential has been increasing to offset some of the declines we've seen around the country in terms of commercial or industrial usage. The impact has not been terrible yet. Also, a lot of utilities have significant cash balances, more than enough to sustain their current rating. They have coverage ratios that are higher than what they need to sustain their current rating. But we've also seen affordability pressures increasing significantly. Non-payments are on the rise. So we're wondering, what are utilities going to do to deal with that in the long run? A lot of utilities that had a planned rate increase this year have decided to forego it or push it back a number of months because during a pandemic earlier this year when unemployment was well over 10%, was not necessarily, from an optics perspective, when you wanted to be asking for a rate increase. So what we're really going to be looking for in the long run is, how are utilities planning to build back? If you're deferring a rate increase this year, what are you planning to do with your rates in 2021, in 2022? If you've drawn down your cash, do you have a plan to build it back up? If you have a lot of customers who've fallen behind on their payments, do you have a plan to get them current again? And so, like I said, we have seen more utilities looking at emergency assistance and repayment assistance programs and trying to roll those out. And we're having those questions whenever we're meeting with the utility about their rating to say, okay, we understand what you're doing for this year. We understand that this is not going to be a financially strong year. Utilities have stronger years and weaker years on a regular basis. Usually it's due to weather. This time it's due to a pandemic and a recession. And the pressures are intense, and rebuilding is going to be a long, slow process. We're expecting it to take years potentially for the economy to get back to where it was in January. And so it's going to be about that strong management, dealing with the affordability challenges and understanding how the playing field is evolving, but also what that means from a financial perspective. And really, we want to see management, we don't want to see, but strong management that will be reflected in the rating. Will consider the full range of options in terms of temporary or time, current adjustments to operating expenses, potentially deferring capital, potentially borrowing as opposed to cash funding, drawing down cash. And what is a short-term measure, and what does this mean for your long-term plans? We will be asking what it is that management's planning to do on that front, and affordability considerations are an important piece of that puzzle.
Yeah, and Joe, coming to you next, this has to have been a huge topic of discussion for Raftelis and its clients over the last several months. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, it definitely has. And, Maria and Erin have done a nice job of highlighting a lot of the affordability and financial planning issues that have come along with it. I think we've seen a number of our clients, especially those that kind of have a long track record of planning, having strong financial policies. They've weathered it, this change, this storm, fairly well. But I also think, as an industry, it's really, to me, it's highlighted the resiliency of the water industry overall, and really just what a fantastic job all utilities do. I couldn't bring my groceries in my house without wiping them clean, with a sanitizing wipe. I was questioning my Amazon packages, but I never once questioned that I could drink the water, coming out of my tap. And I think that's really important. And, a lot of the affordability issues, again, we talked at the beginning that it's a very personal decision. What is affordable? I'm more than happy to pay $100 or $200, $300 a month for clean water service because I know all that goes into it. Utilities need to do a much better job of communicating the vast value of the service that we're providing to our customers. And I think this is an awesome opportunity for utilities to do that, and just to, make sure that everyone understands clean water service is a priority. It is a, human health right. We talked about that. And that's why it's very important for utilities to be able to proactively manage their system, to be able to get the funding they need for the capital improvements, for operating the system, all the things that we've talked about today. And I really think, water utilities are going to come out of this, very strong. Whatever that new normal looks like, utilities will adapt. I think we've done a great job of demonstrating already that we have, and we will, no matter what that sort of unforeseen challenge is going to be next year, the year after, or whenever it happens.
Yeah, there's definitely a positive spin we can put on some of this that we can take away from it. It's not all bad news. Greg, what are your concluding thoughts on all this?
Well, I think, like Joe said, the value of water, I think it's a chance where people need to say, this is our cost of service. If we just treated everybody the same, this is the unit cost of water today, and this is what it's going to be in the future, given the infrastructure, given our water sources and all those different components, and tell people clearly. So communication is very important. I think that there was a failure with and confusion in a lot of the communication under COVID-19, where when people heard there's a moratorium, they took it that you can't shut my water off, which then they said, I'm going to spend that extra money and someone else is going to bail me out, or the state or the federal government, someone else is going to pay for my water. And they could afford it on a month-by-month basis, but you add up 3 or 4 months, they've already spent that money, and now it's a lump sum coming back at them. They don't have it. And I think a lot of people fall into that category. I think a lot of utilities they were struggling with the collection of their money. Anybody that went with a cloud system and had online bill payment, they still could get their revenue coming in. But if it was cash payment or mailing payments in and stuff, and they weren't in the office to get it, or, coin and cash, as a pandemic, transference, that was shut down. So I think there's going to be a move towards more digital collection, online bill payment, digital technologies need to be applied more readily for monitoring assets. That's going to help lower the cost and keep staff safer. I do not believe that here some industry reports early on said that 16.7% of all water utilities across the board in the U.S. were going to take that type of revenue hit, and 20% a revenue hit on the sewer side. I don't think we're going to see those numbers as a nation as a whole. I think it's going to be half or less than half of that on average. But the smaller utilities and the utilities that never built up a reserve to handle any sort of emergency, they're in crisis and they're really bad off. And I think states need to take a serious look to see if privatization, if that even fits the privatization business model. Otherwise, you just have states having to deal with a lot of issues there.
Yeah. Yeah, those are also some concluding thoughts, some good thoughts, Greg. Which that's a whole other discussion. Privatization and sort of the metrics for that, and we're going to get into that in our fourth session of this conference next Thursday. But guys, that seems like a good spot to end it. We definitely covered a lot. Maria, Erin, Joe, Greg, it's been a pleasure talking to you guys. Thanks for taking the time today.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
All right, guys, and for all of our audience still on with us, we are going to be back this Thursday, same time, 1 to 3 p.m. Eastern time. Same format as today. We will have a 30-minute kickoff presentation to tee up our topic, and then go into a 90-minute panel following that. So we look forward to having you back on Thursday, and so we'll go ahead and sign off. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.